Today I'm going to show you how to stretch paper. Many of you find when you do a watercolour painting and you use the wet into wet technique, when the paper gets soaked it cockles, and if you're not very careful those cockles will lead to runbacks or cauliflowers, which can often spoil the appearance of the picture, particularly smooth washes. You can avoid those by stretching your paper. You could use heavy paper, which won't cockle so much, but most of us tend to have an average £140 paper, and if you're going to work very wet, stretching it is a good idea. This paper I'm using is Bockingford £140 knot, which means that it's a good general all-rounder. So you need to make sure before you start that you have everything ready. I've got my drawing board, which is a sheet of MDF, which works very well as a drawing board. Don't use hardboard, because over time you will find that the hardboard will absorb the water that you use to stretch the paper with and it will start to warp. So MDF is the best solution. I've got some of this brown good old-fashioned parcel tape, which needs to be dampened to make it stick. It's not the pre-glued tape that you get, the plastic one, or masking tape. It's this good old-fashioned, as I said, parcel tape here, and you'll need to make it wet to make it stick. You need a sponge, that's just an ordinary cellular sponge that I've got from the supermarket, and a bowl of water. First thing to do is to pre-cut your strips of paper to a little longer than each side of the paper here. So we need one for each side. The next thing we do is we're going to wet the paper with a sponge. With a heavier paper, if you want to stretch it, or the Bockingford paper, some people might dip the paper in a sink or bath full of water to soak it. I find just wetting it with a sponge is slightly less messy and perfectly adequate. So I'm now just going to wet the sponge and I'm going to spread the water all over the paper here. Just have a quick look at the side just to make sure I've covered it with water, which I have done. I'm going to turn it over, a little bit more water on my sponge, and wet the reverse side. Like so, and again just looking down to check that I've wet the whole of the paper. I always do the first side again for luck, and I'm just making sure I've got it nice and clean, getting rid of any little bits and pieces that might appear. I then am going to wet the paper. So I take the sponge and run the paper along it. I do it twice. Don't over wet it because you will just remove the glue and then the paper won't stick down. Press it nice and firmly onto the paper, taking about 1 centimetre of the white paper under the tape. I'm going to do the second side here, like so, pressing it down like that. The third one, everything starts to get a little bit sticky, so just have to be careful and not panic. And then the final side up here, and I can just stick it down like that. And what you might have just seen then, that the paper was beginning to cockle a little bit on that last side, so you do have to work fairly quickly. I then just go down with the drier side of the sponge and I go around the whole of the tape like that, just pressing it down and make sure everything is well stuck. What is happening where it's beginning to cockle is that the paper fibres are absorbing the moisture and they're beginning to swell. And as this progresses, you'll find that the cockling will become more and more apparent, and you'll think that you haven't actually managed to stretch the paper properly. Don't worry, because as the paper begins to dry, the paper fibres shrink a little bit, and in the end the size of the paper that you originally used will be ever so slightly smaller than the original size. It will have shrunk, and this is what creates the tension, so that when you then paint on the paper and re-wet it, it doesn't cockle again. So don't panic if it starts cockling. Now, an hour or so later, you can see the paper is perfectly flat and is ready to paint on. Don't take the paper off the board until your picture's complete. And when you're ready to take it off, use a little craft knife and just run along the sides of the paper, cutting along here and along here, like so. Just lift the paper out and your picture is ready to be put in the portfolio, or even better still, framed. Don't worry about the brown tape here. If you're going to frame your watercolour painting, the chances are you'll want to have a nice window mount, and that can just crop over the brown tape and disappear behind the window mount.